Hi and welcome to Tristan Chow, and today I'll be talking about the Galaxy-class starship, the USS Enterprise D, which has to be my favourite Enterprise, as it also, to be fair, it is the one I grew up with, and which any Trekkie knows feels like, will understand it feels like a second home, if you grew up with said series. Now, as I warned in this title, there'll be massive spoilers, so if you have not watched Picard Season 3, then watch that first, then come back, as this will contain spoilers. The Enterprise D was at the time Starfleet's most state-of-the-art flagship. It was built at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards, orbiting Mars in the Sol system. The construction was a massive undertaking involving thousands of people across many disciplines. Construction was supervised by Commander Quinteros and Dr. Leah Brahms, who was responsible for much of the Enterprise's warp propulsion system design. Some of the Enterprise's components were derived from technology originally developed on the USS Pegasus. In an alternative timeline, the Enterprise was the first Galaxy-class warship constructed. Fortunately, during this time, one of the ship's nacelle tubes was the site. Was the site of multiple murder-suicides while it was still under construction at Utopia Planitia. A member of the construction team, Walter Pierce, became jealous of a former lover's new relationship. He killed the two officers, Marla Finn and William Hodges, then disposed of their bodies in the plasma stream. Pierce committed suicide in the same manner, leaving a telepathic imprint in a bulkhead that was not discovered until 2370 by Chancellor Deanna Troi. On Stardate 40759.5 in the year 2363, the Enterprise was launched from Mars. Enterprise D dedication plaque, second version on Stardate 41025.5, the Enterprise was commissioned. Final systems completion and shakedown was conducted at Earth Station McKinley. Captain Jean-Luc Picard took command of the ship on Stardate 41148 at the order of Rear Admiral Nora Sati. While fleeing from an entity known as the Q, the Enterprise conducted the first high warp saucer separation. The Enterprise was used by the Traveller via his thoughts to move the Enterprise to a galaxy known as M33 at a speed greater than warp 10. A subsequent use of the warp drive by the Traveller propelled the Enterprise to the end of the universe at a speed, according to the ship's computer and instruments, never exceeded that of warp 1.5. The Enterprise received a computer refit in 2364. Later in 2364, the Enterprise was hijacked from Starbase 74 by the Binars. They intended to use the ships to repair the damaged computer on their home world. The Enterprise was returned to Captain Picard's control following the incident, and the Binars freely accepted the consequences of their actions. During its first encounter with the Borg, sections 27, 28 and 29 on decks 4 and 5 and 6 were removed for analysis by the Borg. 18 people were killed. During the Borg incursion of 2366 and 2367, the Enterprise suffered heavy damage. Deck 36, including main engineering, was decompressed after a cutting beam damaged the engineering hull, killing at least 11 and possibly 8 more. The main deflector dish was transformed into a last-ditch energy weapon, which failed due to the simulated knowledge of Captain Picard. In the attempt, the deflector and warp core were overloaded, while several decks were flooded with radiation. Later, the saucer module sustained damage to its impulse drive, and decks 23 through 25 were sliced open by the enemy during the final battle over Sector 001. The extent of the damage required a full refit at Earth Station McKinley, which lasted 5 to 6 weeks. During the refit, the Starship received a phaser upgrade, as well as full damage repair and a new dilithium chamber hatch. The hatch later that year malfunctioned, causing extensive damage to the warp core. Although Romulan sabotage was initially suspected, it was later learned that undetected flaws in the hatch were responsible. The Enterprise was the command ship in Captain Picard's ad hoc armada, which blockaded Romulan assistance to the House of Duras during the Klingon Civil War. It coordinated a tachyon detection grid, which was used to detect cloaked Romulan ships from crossing the border. The ship struck a quantum filament in early 2368, causing a loss of all power aboard ship and severe damage to most systems. Antimatter containment was nearly compromised. Fortunately, repairs were made before the ship was destroyed. Also, in 2368, the Enterprise was trapped in a temporal causality loop near the Typhon Expanse. Each cycle ended in a catastrophic explosion, with the USS Bozeman destroying both ships. Feelings of deja vu allowed the Enterprise crew to gather clues which allowed them to send a message into the next loop and avoid the collision. The ship spent the total of 17.4 days repeating the same interval of time. On a mission to Lygos 7, the Enterprise was attacked by 2 Klingon birds of prey under the command of the Ferengi Damon Lorin. The surprise attack allowed Lorin and his men to successfully hijack the Enterprise, forcing its crew to transport to the surface of Lygos 7 for slave labour. Lorin had planned to sell the Enterprise to the Romulans. However, his plans were thwarted by a group of crew members who had temporarily been transformed into children due to a transporter malfunction. The Enterprise was one of the first Starfleet vessels to dock at the newly commissioned Deep Space Nine, where it offloaded most of the station's Starfleet contingent and its first complement of Danube-class runabouts. The Enterprise departed the station and heading towards the Lapios system. Several weeks later, the Enterprise returned to Deep Space Nine to help repair the Bajoran aqueduct systems that had been damaged during the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. The Enterprise underwent its first baryon sweep at the Remla array in 2369. A stronger field was needed due to the Enterprise's heavy use of warp drive. During the sweep, a mercenary group nearly stole dangerous trilithium resin from the warp core, but was thwarted by the Enterprise senior staff. One of the most important discoveries in history of the Federation was made aboard the Enterprise D. Its crew pieced together Dr. Galen's final research to decipher a message from the ancient humanoids, the first humanoid species in the Milky Way galaxy, who apparently created all the life forms there. Late in 2369, the Enterprise was damaged while rescuing the crew of Romulan Warbird, whose artificial quantum singularity warp core had been colonised by life forms which mistook it for a genuine quantum singularity, causing severe disruptions in space-time. The Enterprise was destroyed due to feedback from a power transfer beam which was killing the life forms young. Fortunately, 4 Enterprise crew members were returning to the ship at the time and were able to avert the Enterprise's destruction and save the Romulan crew. A new warp core was tested aboard the Enterprise in early 2370. The core was installed at Starbase 84. Several points of the power transfer conduits were replaced as well. The core and the conduits had been manufactured on Thanatos 7 using interface technology, attracting interphasic organisms which attached themselves to the crew and began to digest their cellular structures. An interphasic pulse was successful in destroying the creatures. Also during 2370, Commander LaForge engaged in a friendly contest with Donald Kaplan, chief engineer of the USS Intrepid. They competed to have the best power conversion rates in the fleet, with the Enterprise frequently beating out the Intrepid. The Enterprise became one of the few Federation ships to use a cloaking device in 2370 and perhaps the first to successfully use a phasing cloaking device. It had been retrieved from the wreckage of the USS Pegasus and was installed aboard the Enterprise to allow it to pass through an asteroid after a Romulan vessel sealed the ship inside. While investigating a rogue comet in 2370, the Enterprise stumbled upon an archive of lost Desai civilization. The archive trapped the ship, and using matter and DNA aboard to create artifacts from the Desai culture, and the Enterprise was later returned to normal. Lieutenant Worf supervised an upgrade of the Enterprise's weapon systems in late 2370. The tests were interrupted after the ship was ravaged by Barclay's protomorphosis syndrome. At some unspecified point in 2370, the Enterprise docked at Deep Space Nine, where some of the crew went on shore leave, and Lieutenant Jaxier Dax staked Commander Riker 3 strips of gold-pressed latinum when Riker's winning streak ran dry at Quark's. Riker would later contact Quark and trade his unclaimed winnings for information on the Dura sisters. The Enterprise temporarily became sentient in 2370 when an emergent life form used the ship's systems to reproduce. When Miles O'Brien, one of the ship's former transporter chiefs, was captured by the Cardassians in the late 2370, the Enterprise, along with Prokofiev and Vladimir, were sent to patrol the demilitarized zone as a warning to the Cardassian government. In early 2371, the Enterprise received a number of refits to its internal spaces. Colour and lighting schemes were slightly altered, and the bridge inherited a number of new consoles on the port and starboard sides. There were now 4 science stations, 3 along the starboard wall and 1 at the starboard side of the aft stations. Mission Ops was now the second station, followed by Environmental Control. 2 engineering stations rounded out the aft area, while 3 communication stations were presented along the port wall. In addition, the main floor was slightly raised and a chair was placed at the tactical station for the Chief of Security to sit while manning that console. Later that year, the Enterprise picked up a distress call from the observatory in the Amagosa system. An away team led by Commander Riker found that the station had been attacked by Romulans. They also found an injured Dr. Tolian Soren buried among the wreckage. After analysing the Romulan tricorder, they discovered the Romulans were looking for trilithium. Back on the station, Data and LaForge discovered a secret lab filled with solar probes when they are attacked by Soren. Soren then launched a solar probe that destroyed the Amagosa star, producing a level 12 shockwave. After rescuing Data, the Enterprise left the system as the observatory was destroyed and the nearby systems were destroyed. After talking to Guinan about Soren and the Nexus, Picard met with Data in stellar cartography after discovering Soren was altering the ribbon's course. Picard determined Soren was heading for the Viridium system and ordered Worf to set course at maximum warp. The Enterprise arrived at Viridian 3 and intercepted the Klingon bird of prey. The Klingons agreed to a prisoner exchange, for LaForge taking Picard in his place and allowing him to beam to Soren's location, somewhere on the planet's surface. An engagement with a renegade Klingon bird of prey, commanded by the Duras sisters in 2371, resulted in extensive damage to the Enterprise. The ship's magnetic interlocks were ruptured, and before efforts could be made to repair them, a coolant leak began, leading to an unavoidable warp core breach. Faced with this scenario, Commander Riker ordered the evacuation of the crew from the secondary hull to the saucer section. Once the evacuation had been completed, the saucer could separate and get to a safe distance before the star drive section was destroyed by the core breach. LaForge and Dr. Crusher oversaw evacuations of their respective departments and completed it within a minute to spare. The saucer's impulse engines were engaged as soon as it cleared the secondary hull, but the saucer was unable to get to the safe distance before the core breached. The explosion produced an ion shockwave that disabled the entire saucer section, propelled it into a degrading orbit of Viridian 3, forcing the saucer section into the planet's atmosphere. With the saucer hurtling towards the surface of the planet, Data managed to reroute the auxiliary systems to the lateral thrusters and thereby restore thrust control to level out their descent. Moments later, the saucer crash-landed into a jungle on the planet's surface, flattening many of the trees as it came to rest. Owing to the relatively safe landing, the Enterprise's casualties were minimal. Unfortunately, the severe damage sustained by the primary hull in the battle and subsequent crash landing apparently rendered the ship unsalvageable. The ship's crew was rescued by 3 Starfleet vessels, including the Nebula-class USS Farragut, and an Oberth-class ship and a Miranda-class ship. A damaged saucer section later, however, was recovered and put on display at the Fleet Museum. By 2401, the Enterprise D was depicted on a commemorative plaque along other historic ships at the Starfleet Academy. Later that year, in preparation for Frontier Day, Guinan began to selling models of various Starship Enterprises, including the Enterprise D at 10 Forward Avenue. However, much to Riker's chagrin, the Enterprise D models proved to be unpopular. Maybe like the fat one. During Frontier Day in 2401, Commodore Geordie LaForge revealed that the Enterprise D source section had been recovered from Viridian 3 as per the orders of the Prime Directive in order to keep the technology from contaminating the system's pre-warp civilization, and kept at the Fleet Museum. LaForge spent those decades rebuilding the ship bit by bit over a course of 20 years, intending to reveal it as a surprise one day, with the bridge restored to pre-2371 condition and its engines and nacelles coming from the USS Syracuse, although there was a ton of hull work left to be done and the port nacelle cover is a nightmare, according to LaForge. Needing a functional ship not tied into Starfleet's mainframe, the Enterprise's old command crew pressed her back into service to save the Federation from the Borg, although the ship's weapons were limited, with the ship's computers identifying him as Captain Jean-Luc Picard due to the long outdated crew manifest. Picard jokingly accepted a field demotion to command the Enterprise, again with his command crew retaking their old roles. A moment that brought any TNGer to tears. What will happen to the Enterprise D after its resurrection? We'll soon find out. It's also important to add that Geordie loved the Galaxy class so much that when he was captain, he commanded a Galaxy class starship called the USS Challenger. Enterprise D specs. With a total of 42 decks, the Enterprise D was twice the length and had 8 times the interior space of the Constitution class ships of over a century earlier. It carried a combined crew and passenger load of 1,014. The bridge captain's ready room and conference lounge were on deck 1 and were protected by redundant safety interlocks to prevent environmental systems failure. The main shuttle bay was on deck 4, supported by several cargo bays on deck 4 and deck 18. 2 additional shuttle bays were found on deck 13. On deck 8 of the ship was an unfinished multi-purpose deck. Additional workspaces were set there when needed. It also contained the officers' quarters, some guest quarters, and the battle bridge. On deck 12 contained sick bay and a gymnasium, while main engineering was located on deck 36. Engineering took up 12 decks of the secondary hull, with the antimatter storage pods housed on deck 42. There was a science section on deck 15. The primary docking ports were located on either side of the torpedo launcher on deck 25. The nacelle control room was also on that deck. According to Lieutenant Commander Neela Darren, the most acoustically perfect spot on the ship was the 4th intersect of Jeffries Tube 25. The intersection formed a resonance chamber for the sound compression waves. The Enterprise had a maximum sustainable speed of warp 9.6 for 12 hours. The warp core could generate a tremendous amount of energy at once if needed. The only device on the ship capable of channeling such energy all at once at controlled frequencies was the main deflector dish. There were some 4,000 power systems in all on board the ship. It also had 20 transporter rooms, with at least one on deck 6. The armaments of the Enterprise D included 12 phaser arrays, 2 torpedo launchers, a supply of 250 photon torpedoes, and hundreds of antimatter mines. The ship was protected by a high-capacity shield grid that could operate on multiple frequencies. When the ship was destroyed in 2371, the shield frequency was at 257.4 MHz. Following the Enterprise being put back into service in 2401, then Commander Worf noted how he preferred the weaponry aboard its successor ship, the Enterprise E. The bulk of the people on board the Enterprise could be evacuated within 4 minutes. This was executed at Starbase 74 during 2364. During emergency situations, certain large but unprotected areas of the ship were designated emergency shelters, including 10 forward. Collectively, they could hold all the ship's crew and were designated so that the crew could reach one of the areas quickly. In 2367, while caught in Tychon's Rift, the crew were ordered to these areas in order to get extra power from life support in non-sheltered areas. And there you have it, the Enterprise D, one of the finest starships in Starfleet. If you like this video, hit the like, and if you haven't, then please show support by subscribing to this channel. It'd be great to have you here. And so, until the next video, take care, be well. This is Fleet Admiral Tristan signing off.